Ethan Caldwell appeared to have everything of vast fortune, a thriving real estate empire, and a life many could only dream of. From his opulent mansion to his impeccable reputation, his success seemed unshakable. Yet beneath the surface of this perfect life, an invisible storm was brewing. His wife, Lauren, once his closest confidant, had grown distant, her late-night phone calls and mysterious outings sparking quiet doubts. At the same time, Derek, his lifelong friend and trusted business partner, began brushing off Ethan's concerns about suspicious financial discrepancies in their company. The cracks in Ethan's world widened as whispers of betrayal turned into undeniable truths. When Ethan discovers the shocking conspiracy against him, a plan orchestrated by Lauren and Derek to strip him of everything he holds dear, his life is thrown into chaos. Alone and surrounded by deception, Ethan must find the strength to fight back. But hope emerges in an unlikely form. Sam, a street-smart young man whose loyalty and resourcefulness breathe new life into Ethan's battle for justice. As betrayal deepens and tensions rise, Ethan devises a daring plan to expose the truth and reclaim his life. Will he succeed in outmaneuvering the people he once trusted most? And can he rebuild not only his empire, but also his belief in loyalty, resilience, and purpose? Ethan Caldwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his expansive living room, gazing out over the lush green lawn of his estate. The early evening sunlight cast a golden glow over the manicured hedges and the glistening surface of the pool, a scene that seemed almost unreal in its perfection. From this vantage point, Ethan could see everything he had worked so hard to achieve. The sprawling grounds, the luxury cars lined up in the driveway, and the towering mansion that he called home. It had taken years of relentless effort to build this life. Ethan's real estate empire was not just the source of his wealth, but also the embodiment of his ambition. Every deal he closed, every property he developed, had brought him one step closer to the pinnacle of success. His name was synonymous with power and prestige in the city. Yet, as he sipped his glass of aged whiskey, a quiet unease crept into his mind. The lavish charity gala he was hosting that evening should have been a moment of pure pride. The elite of society would be gathering to admire his generosity, his accomplishments, and his seemingly perfect life. But beneath the surface, Ethan felt a nagging emptiness he could not explain. "Ethan, the caterers are asking about the final setup for the dessert table," came the voice of Lauren, his wife. She entered the room gracefully, her crimson evening gown a perfect match for her elegant demeanor. To everyone else, Lauren was the picture of devotion, a loving wife who stood by Ethan's side through all his successes. But Ethan had noticed subtle changes in her over the past months. She was more distant, her smiles felt forced, and her once tender words seemed laced with something unspoken. "I trust your judgment," Ethan replied, turning toward her. "You always know how to make things perfect." Lauren's lips curved into a polite smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something Ethan could not place. "Of course," she said softly. "Everything will be perfect tonight." As she left the room, Ethan felt a pang of longing for the closeness they once shared. They had built this life together, or so he thought. Lately, Lauren's late-night phone calls and the quiet tension in her voice had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He brushed the thought away, reminding himself of the evening's importance. By the time the guests began to arrive, the estate had transformed into a glittering spectacle. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in warm light, and the hum of polite conversation filled the air. Ethan made his rounds, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, all the while keeping an eye on Lauren, who floated through the crowd with practiced grace. It was during one of these moments, as Ethan stood near the grand piano, that a familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Ethan Caldwell, still the king of the castle," said Brian Turner, an old acquaintance from Ethan's early days in real estate. "Brian." Ethan greeted him warmly, though he was surprised to see him. Brian had left the city years ago after a failed business venture, and their paths had not crossed since. "What brings you here?" "Curiosity," Brian said, his tone light, but his expression serious. "You've done well for yourself, Ethan. But let me give you some advice. Not everyone who smiles at you tonight has your best interests at heart. Ethan's brow furrowed. What are you getting at? Brian shrugged. Just a thought. Success attracts all kinds of people. Some are genuine, and others, well, let's just say they have their own agendas. With that, he excused himself, leaving Ethan unsettled. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of toasts and speeches, but Brian's words lingered in Ethan's mind. As the last of the guests departed and the staff began cleaning up, Ethan stood alone on the balcony, staring out into the night. For the first time, the grandeur of his life felt hollow, as if the walls of his castle were not as strong as they seemed. The next morning, Ethan decided to shake off the strange feeling by going for a drive. He climbed into his sleek black car and took to the quiet roads that wound through the countryside outside the city. Driving had always been his way of clearing his head, but today, even the open road offered little solace. As he approached a narrow bridge, Ethan noticed a car pulled over to the side with its hood propped open. A young man, barely in his 20s, stood beside it, waving for help. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his instinct to keep driving warring with a pang of conscience. In his world, stopping for strangers was not something he often did, but something about the boy's desperate expression made him pull over. Ethan stepped out of his car and approached cautiously. "Need some help?" he asked. The boy looked up, relief washing over his face. "Yeah, my car broke down and my phone's dead. I don't know what to do." Ethan examined the car briefly, though he was no mechanic. "I'm not sure I can fix this, but I can give you a ride to the nearest gas station." "Thank you," the boy said earnestly. "I'm Sam, by the way." "Ethan," he replied, gesturing for Sam to get in. As they drove, Ethan learned that Sam was working multiple part-time jobs to support himself after aging out of the foster system. The boy's resilience and humility struck a chord with Ethan, reminding him of his own struggles in the early days of his career. At the gas station, Ethan handed Sam some cash to cover a tow truck. "Take care of yourself, Sam," he said as he got back into his car. Sam hesitated, then said, "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." Most people would have just driven by. As Ethan drove away, he felt a flicker of something he had not felt in a long time: genuine connection. The encounter with Sam stayed with him, a small but powerful reminder that kindness, even in the smallest acts, could make a difference. Back at the mansion, Lauren was on the phone again, her voice low and urgent. Ethan paused in the hallway, catching fragments of her conversation. "He doesn't suspect anything," she said. "We'll talk more later." Ethan's chest tightened. The unease that had been simmering beneath the surface now felt like a storm brewing. He knew he had to find out what was going on, but for now, he would bide his time. As he sat in his study that evening, staring at the flickering glow of the fireplace, Ethan's thoughts turned to Sam and Brian. One a reminder of the value of kindness, the other a warning to stay vigilant. He could not shake the feeling that his perfect life was about to be tested in ways he could never have anticipated. With a heavy sigh, Ethan resolved to pay closer attention to the cracks forming in his world. He did not yet know where they would lead, but he was determined to protect the life he had built, whatever the cost. Ethan woke the next morning to the faint scent of coffee drifting through the mansion. The sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, dappling his room in a golden glow, but the warmth did little to ease the tension in his chest. Lauren's muffled voice carried through the hallways as she spoke to someone on the phone, her tone light yet purposeful. Ethan lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the fragments of her late-night conversation in his mind. "She doesn't suspect anything." The words lingered like a thorn. Was it paranoia, or had Lauren's words revealed something deeper? Ethan couldn't be sure, but the seed of doubt planted at the gala was beginning to grow roots. Ethan found Lauren in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a delicate porcelain cup. She greeted him with a smile, but it felt paper-thin, a facade more than anything genuine. "Morning," she said, handing him the cup as if nothing were amiss. "Morning," Ethan replied, studying her face for signs of the woman he had once trusted implicitly. Her gaze flitted briefly to her phone, lying face down on the counter, before she turned back to him. "I have a spa appointment later," she said casually. "It's been such a busy week. I could use some time to relax." Ethan nodded, hiding his unease. You deserve it. His words came out measured, a mask of his own. As Lauren left the room, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee. The sense of unease only deepened when he noticed her phone light up with a new message. He resisted the urge to pick it up, unwilling to cross that line yet. The day passed slowly, Ethan dividing his time between business calls and reviewing financial reports. At first glance, everything appeared normal, but his sharp eye caught discrepancies in the company's accounts. Small amounts of money had been funneled into ambiguous accounts under vague labels. It wasn't enough to raise alarms, but it was enough to catch his attention. He dialed Derek's number. His business partner had been with him since the early days, and their partnership had always been a cornerstone of Ethan's success. When Derek picked up, his voice was as jovial as ever. "Ethan, what's up?" "Something's off in the accounts," Ethan said. "There are transfers I don't recognize." Derek chuckled lightly. "Probably just clerical errors. You know how accounting gets bogged down with all the projects we have going." "Maybe," Ethan said, though the explanation didn't sit right. "I'd like to review it together tomorrow." "Of course," Derek said. "But don't stress. Everything's under control." Ethan ended the call feeling no more assured than before. Derek's easy dismissal only fueled his suspicions. For the first time in years, Ethan began to wonder if even Derek, his closest confidant, could be hiding something. Later that afternoon, Ethan decided to take a walk around the estate, hoping the fresh air might clear his mind. As he strolled past the garden, he noticed someone kneeling near the flower beds. It was Sam, the young man he had helped the previous day, now pulling weeds with a quiet diligence. "Sam," Ethan called out, surprised to see him. Sam stood quickly, brushing dirt from his hands. "Mr. Caldwell, I hope it's okay. The gardener told me they were short on help, and I thought I could pitch in." Ethan studied the boy for a moment. Sam's clothes were plain, and his hands bore the roughness of someone accustomed to hard work. "You don't have to call me Mr. Caldwell," Ethan said. "Just Ethan." Sam nodded, his face flushed. "Thanks again for yesterday. I'd still be stuck on that road if it weren't for you." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're welcome. But what are you doing here? Did the gardener offer you a job?" "Not officially," Sam said. "I just wanted to help out. Figured I'd earn my keep." Ethan was struck by Sam's humility and initiative. In a world where so many people seemed focused on taking advantage, Sam's willingness to contribute without expecting anything in return was refreshing. "Well, you're welcome to stay for lunch," Ethan offered. "Come inside when you're done here." Sam hesitated, but the growl of his stomach betrayed his answer. "Thank you, Ethan. That's kind of you." At lunch, Sam opened up about his life. He had grown up in foster care, bouncing from one home to another, never finding a place where he truly belonged. When he turned 18, he was left to fend for himself, scraping by with odd jobs and sheer determination. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," Ethan said, surprising himself with the admission. "I didn't grow up with much. Worked my way up from nothing." Sam looked at him with wide eyes, as though the polished, successful man sitting before him couldn't possibly have known hardship. "Really? But you have all this." Ethan glanced around the dining room, taking in the ornate chandelier and the pristine white walls. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of discontent with the opulence surrounding him. "It wasn't always this way," he said. "It took years of work, and even now, it's not as perfect as it seems." Sam seemed to sense the weight in Ethan's words, but didn't pry. Instead, he said, "Thanks for giving me a chance. People like me don't get many of those." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure what Sam's presence in his life meant just yet. He only knew that the boy's honesty was a welcome contrast to the shadows that seemed to loom larger each day. That evening, Ethan returned to the study with renewed determination. He sifted through company records late into the night, piecing together a trail of transactions that suggested someone was siphoning funds. The pattern pointed to an inside job, but the amounts were carefully hidden, scattered across multiple accounts. As the hours dragged on, his mind wandered back to Lauren. He remembered the early days of their relationship, when every glance and word between them had felt effortless. Now, her distance felt like a wall he couldn't breach. Her conversations, Her secrecy, everything seemed to point to a truth he wasn't ready to face. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. It was Grace, his assistant, holding a folder. "I thought you might need this," she said, placing it on the desk. "What's this?" Ethan asked, opening it. "Some reports I've been reviewing," Grace said. "I noticed irregularities and thought you should see them." Ethan's heart sank as he scanned the documents. The discrepancies matched the ones he had found. Grace had been his most loyal employee for years, and now her sharp instincts had confirmed his fears. "Thank you, Grace," he said, his voice heavy. "I don't know what's happening yet, but something isn't right." "I've always trusted you, Ethan," she said. "If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." As she left, Ethan sat back in his chair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. His wife's secrecy, Derek's dismissiveness, the evidence piling up, it all pointed to a conspiracy, one he could no longer ignore. For the first time, Ethan felt the fortress of his life cracking under the strain of betrayal. But as he glanced at the folder and thought of Sam's quiet resilience, he knew one thing: he would not go down without a fight. The following morning, Ethan woke to a fog of unease lingering in his mind. His discoveries the night before left little room for doubt. Someone close to him was actively betraying his trust. He tried to shake the feeling as he dressed, tying his navy blue tie with practiced precision, but the weight of suspicion bore heavily on his chest. The day began like any other. Lauren sat at the breakfast table, flipping through a glossy magazine while sipping tea from a porcelain cup. She greeted Ethan with a faint smile, but he couldn't help noticing how she avoided his gaze. "I'll be heading to the office early today," Ethan said, watching her reaction closely. Lauren barely looked up, busy as ever. "Don't forget we have dinner plans with Derek and his wife tonight." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course." He lingered for a moment, then added, "I noticed something strange in the company's accounts. It looks like someone might be mismanaging funds." Lauren's hand paused briefly on her cup before she set it down gently. "I'm sure it's nothing serious. Derek can probably sort it out." Her calm dismissal sent a chill through Ethan. He gave her a small smile, masking his growing doubts. "You're probably right." At the office, Ethan spent the morning scrutinizing financial records. Grace joined him, her sharp eye and methodical nature proving invaluable. Together, they uncovered more evidence of the siphoning scheme. It was clear that the fraud had been orchestrated with care, each transaction small enough to avoid immediate detection. "It looks like the withdrawals were timed with the closing of major deals," Grace said, pointing to the dates on the report. "Whoever's doing this knows the company's operations inside and out." Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "That narrows it down, but it's still not enough. I need proof, something concrete." Grace hesitated before speaking. "Have you considered the possibility that Derek might be involved?" The question hung in the air like a heavy curtain. Ethan wanted to dismiss it outright, but the thought had already crossed his mind. Derek had been his closest friend and business partner for years. The idea of betrayal from someone he considered family was almost too much to bear. "I don't want to believe it," Ethan said finally. "But at this point, I can't rule anything out." As the afternoon wore on, Ethan decided to step out for fresh air. The city buzzed around him, cars honking, pedestrians rushing by, but he felt strangely detached, as if the world was moving on without him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Lauren. "Dinner at 7. Don't be late." Ethan stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Lauren's outward support had once been a source of comfort, but now every word from her felt calculated, like part of a larger game. As he stood on the corner, lost in thought, a familiar voice called out, "Ethan!" He turned to see Sam approaching, carrying a stack of newspapers under one arm. "Sam," Ethan said, surprised but genuinely glad to see the young man. Sam smiled shyly. "Didn't expect to run into you. How's it going?" Ethan gave a non-committal shrug. "Could be better." "Yeah, I get that," Sam said, his tone understanding. "Life's not always easy, even for people who seem to have it all." Ethan was struck by the boy's insight. Despite his own struggles, Sam carried himself with a quiet dignity that Ethan admired. "You're a good kid, Sam," he said. "If you ever need anything, let me know." Some smile vidant. Thanks, Ethan. That means a lot. Their brief interaction lifted Ethan's spirits, if only slightly. As he returned to his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sam's grounded outlook had given him a moment of clarity in an otherwise chaotic day. That evening, Ethan arrived home just in time for the dinner plans Lauren had arranged. She looked stunning in a sleek black dress, her hair swept up in an elegant twist. Ethan couldn't help but admire her beauty, even as doubt gnawed at him. "You ready?" Lauren asked, her voice as smooth as silk. "Let's go," Ethan replied, offering his arm. The restaurant was one of the city's finest, a place where deals were made and power dynamics played out over candlelit tables. Derek and his wife, Vanessa, were already seated when Ethan and Lauren arrived. "Ethan, Lauren!" Derek greeted them warmly, rising to shake Ethan's hand. "Glad you could make it." The evening began pleasantly enough, with laughter and small talk flowing freely. But as the night wore on, Ethan noticed subtle glances exchanged between Derek and Lauren, fleeting but unmistakable. "So, Ethan," Derek said, swirling his wine glass. "How's business? Still building empires, I assume?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, but his mind racing. "It's going well, though I've noticed some irregularities in the accounts lately." Derek's smile didn't falter, but Ethan caught a flicker of something in his eyes, unease, perhaps. Probably just a clerical error. You know how it is with big operations. "Maybe," Ethan said, letting the conversation drop. But in that moment, he felt certain Derek knew more than he was letting on. As they drove home, Lauren was unusually quiet. Ethan stole a glance at her, wondering what thoughts hid behind her serene expression. "You didn't seem yourself tonight," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Just tired," Ethan replied, his tone nonchalant. Lauren nodded, but her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than usual. "Well, try to get some rest. You've been working too hard." As they pulled into the driveway, Ethan felt the weight of the evening settle over him. Lauren disappeared into the house without another word, leaving Ethan alone in the car. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in his mind. Derek's subtle unease, Lauren's distant behavior, the missing funds. Everything was starting to connect, and the picture it painted was one of betrayal. In the quiet of the night, Ethan retreated to his study. The crackling of the fireplace was the only sound as he reviewed the financial reports once more, searching for anything he might have missed. Grace had been right. Derek's access and timing matched perfectly with the fraudulent transactions. But what Ethan couldn't fathom was why. Derek had everything he could want: wealth, power, and a friendship that spanned decades. Ethan's thoughts turned to Lauren. Could she be involved? The idea twisted like a knife in his gut. She had been his partner, his confidant. Betrayal from her would be more than a financial blow. It would shatter the foundation of his life. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Grace. "I thought you might still be awake," she said, stepping into the room. "I can't sleep," Ethan admitted, running a hand through his hair. Grace placed a folder on his desk. "I found something else. I think you'll want to see this." Ethan opened the folder and scanned its contents. It was a series of emails between Derek and an anonymous recipient, discussing plans to move funds offshore. The details were damning. "Where did you find this?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "It was buried in the company's server," Grace said. "Whoever sent these emails tried to cover their tracks, but not well enough." Ethan's jaw tightened. The evidence was mounting, but he needed more before confronting Derek or Lauren. For now, he would wait, watching as the masks they wore began to slip. The morning sun broke over the Caldwell estate, casting long shadows across the lawn. Ethan sat at his breakfast table, but the lavish spread before him remained untouched. His appetite had long been replaced by a gnawing sense of urgency. Grace's discovery of Derek's incriminating emails lingered in his mind. He looked across the table at Lauren, who was scrolling through her phone. Her expression was serene, her movements unhurried, yet Ethan's thoughts swirled with doubt. Was her calm demeanor genuine, or was it the polished act of someone with something to hide? "You've been quiet lately," Lauren remarked without looking up. "Just a lot on my mind," Ethan replied. Lauren set her phone down and looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. You've been working too much. Maybe we should take a vacation, just the two of us. Get away from all the stress. Her words were kind, but Ethan couldn't help wondering if they masked another motive. I'll think about it, he said, his tone noncommittal. After breakfast, Ethan retreated to his study, where Grace was already waiting with fresh updates. She had been working tirelessly, combing through financial records and company communications. I found another lead, she said, laying a new folder on the desk. Ethan opened it to find details of a shell company registered under a name he didn't recognize. The transactions funneled through this company matched the amounts siphoned from Caldwell Enterprises. It's tied to an offshore account, Grace explained. The paperwork is deliberately vague, but I'm certain Derek is behind this. Ethan nodded grimly. He couldn't have done this alone. Someone's feeding him inside information. Someone close to me. Grace hesitated, then said softly, You think it's Lauren? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the papers in his hands. I don't want to believe it, he said finally. But if she's involved, I need proof. Ethan decided to act. He instructed Grace to keep digging into Derek's dealings while he focused on uncovering Lauren's role, if any, in the betrayal. That evening, as Lauren prepared for another girls' night out, Ethan pretended to be engrossed in his laptop. He watched her from the corner of his eye, noting how carefully she chose her outfit and how quickly she checked her phone after receiving a text message. Where are you headed tonight? He asked casually. Dinner with Kelly, Lauren replied without hesitation. Ethan nodded, feigning disinterest. Enjoy. As soon as she left, Ethan grabbed his keys and followed. He kept his distance, navigating the streets carefully to avoid drawing attention. His heart pounded as Lauren's car took a sudden turn into an unfamiliar neighborhood, a quiet, upscale area far from where Kelly lived. Lauren parked in front of a modest but elegant townhouse. Ethan pulled over a block away, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. From the shadows, he watched as she approached the door. The door opened, and Derek stepped out to greet her. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The sight of his wife and his closest friend together confirmed what he had long feared. He couldn't hear their conversation, but their relaxed body language and the ease of their interaction spoke volumes. Ethan waited until they went inside before driving away, his mind racing. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion, it was reality. Back at the estate, Ethan paced the length of his study, trying to decide his next move. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but he forced himself to stay composed. Acting rashly would only give Derek and Lauren the upper hand. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. It was Sam. Hey, Ethan, Sam said hesitantly. The gardener said you wanted some extra help around the house. Thought I'd see if there's anything I can do. Ethan managed a faint smile. Sam's earnestness was a small but welcome distraction. Thanks, Sam. I could use someone I can trust right now. Sam is bra uprod. Everything okay? Ethan hesitated, then said, Not really, but I'm working on it. Something in Sam's expression softened. You've done a lot for me, Ethan. If there's anything I can do to help, just say the word. Ethan placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. I might take you up on that. Over the next few days, Ethan methodically pieced together the evidence against Derek and Lauren. He reviewed Grace's findings, kept a close eye on Lauren's movements, and quietly began building a case. One afternoon, while reviewing company records in his office, Ethan called Sam in for a favor. I need you to deliver something, Ethan said, handing him an envelope. Take this to Grace at the office. It's important. Sam nadi digarli. You can count on me. As Sam left, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. The boy's honesty and determination were a stark contrast to the deception surrounding him. That evening, Ethan received a call from Grace. The envelope you sent me, it has the final piece we needed. The transactions trace back to a bank account jointly opened by Derek and Lauren. There's no denying it now. Ethan clenched his jaw, the confirmation cutting deeper than he expected. Thank you, Grace. Keep everything secure. I'll handle the rest. Lauren returned home late that night, her demeanor calm and collected as usual. Ethan watched her silently as she poured herself a glass of wine. "How was your dinner?" he asked, his tone casual. "It was nice," she replied, sipping her drink. Ethan nodded, suppressing the surge of anger threatening to boil over. "Good. You deserve a break." Lauren gave him a brief smile before heading upstairs. Once she was out of sight, Ethan sank into the couch, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him. He knew the time for confrontation was drawing near, but he needed to ensure every detail was accounted for. Derek and Lauren thought they were in control, but Ethan was determined to turn the tables. As the house fell silent, Ethan sat alone in the dark, his thoughts racing. He had spent his life building an empire, trusting the people closest to him to share in his success. Now those very people had conspired to take it all away. But as he thought of Grace's loyalty and Sam's quiet determination, Ethan felt a spark of resilience. He wasn't alone in this fight. With careful planning and the right allies, he would expose the truth and reclaim the life they had tried to steal. The morning after Lauren's late return, Ethan sat in his study, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. The betrayal was undeniable. Now Lauren and Derek had worked together to siphon money from his company, likely under the belief that Ethan was too consumed by his empire to notice the cracks. But they had underestimated him. He took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling over him like a heavy fog. This was no longer just about protecting his fortune. It was about protecting everything he had built, his name and his integrity. Ethan picked up his phone and dialed Grace. "I need you to come by the house later. Bring everything we have." "Of course," she replied without hesitation. After ending the call, Ethan stepped out into the garden for some air. He found Sam working diligently near the hedges, his sleeves rolled up and his brow damp with sweat. Despite the challenges Sam faced, he carried himself with quiet determination, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. "Sam," Ethan called out, walking toward him. Sam straightened and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Hey, Ethan, everything okay?" Ethan nodded. "I need your help. It's delicate." Sam tilted his head, curiosity mixed with concern. "What's going on?" Ethan hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "Let's just say I'm dealing with something complicated, and I need someone I can trust." "Are you in?" Sam didn't hesitate. "You've done a lot for me. I'm in." That evening, Grace arrived at the mansion with a folder of documents. She sat across from Ethan and Sam in the study, the atmosphere thick with tension. Grace glanced at Sam, then back at Ethan. "Does he know what's going on?" "Not everything," Ethan admitted. "But he's trustworthy." Grace nodded, then opened the folder. "Here's what we have. The offshore accounts, the shell company, and the transfers, they all tie back to Derek and Lauren. This is enough to press charges." Ethan studied the documents, his jaw tightening. "I don't want to move too quickly. If we confront them now, they might deny everything or try to cover their tracks. We need them to incriminate themselves." Sam, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "What if we set a trap? Give them something they think they can take, but it's all part of your plan." Ethan looked at him thoughtfully. "Go on." "Well," Sam said, leaning forward, "what if you create a fake opportunity? Something big enough to tempt them, something they can't resist. If they go for it, you'll have proof they're still scheming." Grace raised an eyebrow. "That could work. It would force them to act, and if we monitor their moves, we'll have them red-handed." Ethan nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind. "It's risky, but it's worth it. Let's do it." Over the next few days, Ethan carefully laid the groundwork for the trap. He spread word through trusted contacts about a major real estate deal, a lucrative development project that promised significant returns. He knew the rumors would reach Derek, and he watched closely as the bait was set. In the meantime, Ethan kept up appearances at home, maintaining his usual routine with Lauren. She remained as composed as ever, but Ethan noticed small signs of strain, averted eyes, guarded words, and a subtle tension in her posture. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Lauren brought up the supposed deal. "I heard from Kelly that you're working on something big," she said casually. "Is it true?" Ethan forced a smile. "Word travels fast. It's still in the early stages, but yes, it could be a game changer." Lauren's lips curved into a faint smile. "I hope it goes well. You deserve another win." Her words sounded supportive, but Ethan caught the glint of something else in her eyes' calculation. The following week, Derek called Ethan out of the blue. "Ethan, we need to talk about this new deal. It sounds promising, and I'd like to be involved." Ethan felt a surge of satisfaction, but kept his tone neutral. "Of course. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss it." The meeting was held at the office, with Derek feigning enthusiasm as they went over the fabricated details of the deal. Ethan played his part perfectly, presenting the opportunity as if it were legitimate. "I'll need someone to handle the financial side," Ethan said, watching Derek closely. "Think you're up for it?" "Absolutely," Derek replied, his eagerness barely contained. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Good. Let's make this happen." That evening, Ethan relayed the day's events to Grace and Sam. "He took the bait," Ethan said, his voice calm but tinged with resolve. "Now we wait for him to make his move." Grace nodded. "I've set up surveillance on the accounts connected to the deal. If Derek tries anything, we'll know immediately." Sam added, "What about Lauren? Do you think she'll get involved?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "If she's part of this, she'll reveal herself soon enough. For now, we focus on Derek." Days passed, and Ethan's patience was rewarded when Grace informed him of suspicious activity. "Derek's already moving funds," she said. "It's not much yet, but he's testing the waters." Ethan clenched his fists, the betrayal cutting deeper with each revelation. "Let him dig his own grave. The more he does, the stronger our case becomes." That night, as Ethan prepared for bed, Lauren approached him with a warmth that felt out of place. "You've been working so hard lately," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Ethan forced a smile. "It's all part of the job." Lauren hesitated, then said, "You know I'm always here for you, right?" Ethan searched her face, trying to find the woman he had once trusted implicitly. "I know," he said quietly. As she left the room, Ethan felt a pang of sorrow. The evidence pointed to her guilt, but a part of him still hoped he was wrong. The following morning, Derek made his move. Grace notified Ethan that a large sum of money had been funneled into the offshore account linked to the shell company. It was the proof they needed. Ethan called Sam and Grace to the mansion that afternoon. "It's time to confront them," he said, his voice firm. "But we do it my way. No anger, no rash decisions. We let the evidence speak for itself." Sam looked at him with quiet determination. "Whatever you need, I'm with you." Grace placed a hand on the folder containing their findings. "Let's bring this to light." Ethan nodded, his resolve unshakable. "It's time to end this." The day of the confrontation arrived with an unusual stillness. Ethan sat in his study, mentally rehearsing every step of the plan. He had always prided himself on his composure, but today his emotions simmered just beneath the surface. Betrayal, anger, sadness all fought for space in his mind. Yet he knew he could not falter now. Grace entered quietly, carrying the folder of evidence. "Everything's ready," she said, her voice steady but soft. Ethan glanced at her, grateful for her unwavering loyalty. "Thank you, Grace. I don't know how I'd have done this without you." "You would have found a way," Grace replied firmly. "But I'm glad I could help." Sam arrived shortly after, his usual energy tempered by the seriousness of the situation. He sat across from Ethan, his expression resolute. "I'm here, Ethan. Just tell me what you need." Ethan nodded, feeling a swell of appreciation for the young man's courage. "You've already done more than I could have asked. Just stay close and watch for anything unexpected." Ethan called Derek later that morning, inviting him to the mansion for a meeting under the guise of finalizing the development deal. "I want to go over everything with you before we move forward," Ethan said, his voice calm but deliberate. "Sounds good," Derek replied, his tone confident. After ending the call, Ethan turned to Grace. "Do you think Lauren will come?" "She'll come," Grace said. "If she's as involved as we think, she won't let Derek face this alone." By early afternoon, the stage was set. Ethan waited in the grand living room, his demeanor cool and composed, though his heart raced beneath the surface. Grace and Sam remained out of sight, but ready to step in if needed. The sound of car tires crunching on the gravel driveway signaled Derek's arrival. Ethan stood, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Moments later, Derek entered, his easy smile masking the depths of his betrayal. "Ethan, Derek said warmly, extending a hand. Excited to wrap this up. Ethan shook his hand, his grip firm but unyielding. Me too. Let's make sure everything's in order. Derek's confidence flickered slightly as Lauren stepped into the room behind him. She wore a carefully curated expression of support, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease when they met Ethan's. Lauren, Ethan said, his tone neutral. I wasn't expecting you. I thought I'd join, Lauren said, her voice light. This is an important deal, after all. Of course, Ethan replied, gesturing for them to sit. Ethan began by reviewing the details of the fictitious deal, speaking with the same precision and authority he always did. Derek nodded along, occasionally chiming in with suggestions that masked his true intentions. But Ethan was watching more than listening, observing every subtle glance exchanged between Derek and Lauren. Their partnership, once hidden beneath layers of deception, now seemed glaringly obvious. Before we move forward, Ethan said, his tone shifting slightly, there's something I want to clarify. Derek stiffened, though he tried to hide it. What's that? Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly. I've noticed some irregularities in the company accounts. Funds being moved in ways that don't align with our operations. Lauren's expression faltered for a split second before she recovered. I'm sure it's just a mistake, she said quickly. Maybe, Ethan said, his gaze piercing, but I took the liberty of investigating further. He opened the folder Grace had prepared, sliding it across the table toward Derek and Lauren. This is what I found. Derek's hand hesitated as he picked up the folder. He scanned the contents, his face paling as the damning evidence came into focus. Lauren leaned over to look, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. What is this? Derek asked, his voice wavering. It's proof, Ethan said evenly. Proof of the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the stolen funds, and the fact that both of you orchestrated it together. Lauren's composure broke first. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice rising. You're accusing us of betraying me, Ethan interrupted, his tone cold and cutting. Don't insult my intelligence, Lauren. The evidence is right there. The room fell into tense silence. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but seemed to think better of it. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his confidence replaced by thinly veiled panic. Ethan, Derek began, his tone feigned regret. It's not what you think. There were opportunities you were too busy to notice, and I thought I could manage them for us. For the company. By stealing from me? Ethan asked, his voice laced with disbelief. It wasn't stealing, Derek insisted weakly. It was reallocating resources. And the plan to frame me? Ethan pressed. Was that reallocating resources too? Derek froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Lauren shot him a sharp look, her own mask slipping. This is absurd, Lauren said, her voice tight. You're trying to twist things to make us look guilty. Ethan shook his head slowly. I don't need to twist anything. The facts speak for themselves. Before either of them could respond, Grace entered the room, carrying additional documents. I think you'll want to see this, she said, placing them on the table. Derek and Lauren stared at her, their faces betraying their growing desperation. These are emails, Grace said calmly. Correspondence between the two of you outlining your plans. They're time-stamped and verified. Lauren's face turned ashen. You've been spying on us? She demanded. No, Ethan replied, his voice steady. I've been protecting what's mine. Derek's bravado crumbled. Ethan, we can work this out. Let's not blow this out of proportion. Ethan stood, his expression resolute. You had every chance to come clean, Derek. To speak to me. Instead, you conspired behind my back, alongside my wife. Lauren rose from her seat, her voice shaking with anger. You were too busy with your precious company to notice anything else. Do you know how it feels to be invisible in your own marriage? Ethan's jaw tightened. If you felt neglected, we could have talked. But you chose betrayal over honesty. That's on you. At that moment, Sam stepped into the room, his presence quiet but firm. He stood by Ethan's side, a silent reminder of the trust and loyalty that still existed in Ethan's life. Ethan turned to Derek and Lauren, his voice cold but calm. You made your choices. Now you'll face the consequences. Ethan stood firm, his hands resting on the back of the chair where Lauren had been seated moments before. Across the table, Derek and Lauren exchanged uneasy glances, their carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the weight of the evidence before them. Grace stepped forward, her calm demeanor sharp as steel. The evidence is clear. The emails, the offshore account transactions, the shell company, everything connects back to the two of you. Derek's confident facade shattered. His shoulders slumped, and his voice turned pleading. Ethan, listen. This got out of hand. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Didn't mean for it to go this far? Ethan repeated, his voice low but taut with anger. You didn't mean to steal from me? You didn't mean to frame me? Tell me, Derek, at what point did you think any of this was forgivable? Derek opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His face turned pale, and he slumped back in his chair, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. Lauren, however, bristled with anger. She stood abruptly, her voice shaking but defiant. You have no idea what it's been like, Ethan. You were so consumed by your work, by your empire, that you stopped seeing me. I became nothing more than an accessory in your perfect life. Ethan's eyes narrowed. And your solution was to conspire with my closest friend? To steal from me? To destroy everything we built together? Lauren's voice rose, her emotions spilling over. I was desperate for something more than living in the shadow of your ambition. You think this mansion, these riches, make up for the fact that you haven't really been here for years. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. You could have talked to me, Lauren. You could have told me how you felt. But instead, you chose this. And now, you expect me to believe it was desperation that drove you? No, it was greed. The tension in the room was palpable. Grace stood silently to the side, her presence a steadying force. Sam, standing near the doorway, watched the scene with wide eyes, his fists clenched at his sides. Ethan turned his attention back to Derek. You were more than my business partner. You were my friend, my brother in everything but blood. And this is how you repay me. Derek's voice was barely a whisper. I made a mistake. Mistake, Ethan said sharply. A mistake is forgetting an appointment or misplacing a file. You plotted to destroy me, Derek. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. Lauren's anger gave way to desperation. Ethan, please. We can fix this. We can move past it. It doesn't have to end this way. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. It already has, Lauren. You made sure of that the moment you betrayed me. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. Two uniformed officers entered the room, their presence commanding attention. Ethan had called them earlier, ensuring they would be ready to act when the time came. Lauren's eyes widened in panic. You're having us arrested? Ethan, you can't do this. You did this to yourselves, Ethan said, his voice cold. Derek stood, his hands raised in a feeble gesture of surrender. Ethan, don't. The officers stepped forward, one taking Derek's arm, while the other addressed Lauren. Mrs. Caldwell, you'll need to come with us. No, Lauren shouted, her composure completely shattered. Ethan, you can't let them take me. I loved you. Ethan's gaze was unyielding. If you loved me, you would have chosen a different path. The room fell into a tense silence as the officers escorted Derek and Lauren out. Lauren's protests faded into the distance, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps on the marble floor. Grace stepped closer to Ethan, her voice soft. You did the right thing. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He stared at the empty chairs where Derek and Lauren had sat moments before, the weight of their betrayal settling heavily on his shoulders. Right doesn't make it any easier, Ethan said finally. Later, Ethan retreated to his study. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its warmth doing little to chase away the chill that had settled over him. He sat in his leather chair, staring into the flames, his mind replaying every moment of the confrontation. Sam knocked lightly on the door before stepping inside. Hey, he said quietly. Just checking on you. Ethan looked up, offering a faint smile. Come in, Sam. Sam hesitated, then took a seat across from Ethan. I don't know what to say. What they did, it's awful. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Ethan nodded slowly. It's not just what they did, it's who they were to me. My wife. My best friend. I trusted them completely. Sam leaned forward, his expression earnest. Not everyone's like that, Ethan. There are still people who care about you. People who would never betray you. Ethan looked at the young man before him, his heart softening. You're one of those people, Sam. I don't think I would have gotten through this without you. Sam flushed slightly, but smiled. You owe me first. I just wanted to return the favor. As the night wore on, Ethan felt the first glimmers of hope breaking through the darkness. Lauren and Derek's betrayal had shaken him to his core, but the loyalty of people like Grace and Sam reminded him that trust could still be found in the unlikeliest of places. Ethan rose from his chair and placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. Thank you, Sam, for everything. I owe you more than I can say. You don't owe me anything, Sam said firmly. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm just glad I could help. Ethan smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through him for the first time in weeks. Maybe there's still hope after all. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Ethan's study, painting the walls in golden hues, but the warmth outside contrasted sharply with the chill in his heart. The events of the previous day lingered heavily in his mind. Derek and Lauren's betrayal had been laid bare, their protests drowned by the undeniable evidence. Yet Ethan found no joy in their downfall, only a grim satisfaction that justice was finally in motion. Grace arrived at the estate early, carrying a fresh stack of legal documents. She knocked lightly on the open door before stepping inside. Ethan, she began, her voice gentle, the lawyers are ready to move forward with the case. They're confident everything will hold up in court. Ethan nodded, standing by the window and gazing out over the lawn. Good. It needs to be airtight. No loopholes, no room for them to twist the narrative. Grace approached, setting the papers on his desk. It will be. We've got everything: financial records, email trails, witness statements. Their scheme is completely exposed. He turned to her, his expression a mix of gratitude and weariness. I don't know how to thank you, Grace. You've been my rock through all of this. You don't have to thank me, Grace replied. I believe in what you've built, Ethan. I wasn't going to let them take it away from you. Ethan spent the rest of the morning reviewing the documents, his focus sharpening with each passing hour. He could feel the pieces of his life slowly falling back into place, though the cracks left by betrayal would take much longer to heal. At midday, Sam arrived, carrying a tray with sandwiches and coffee. Thought you might need a break, he said with a small smile. Ethan chuckled softly. You're too good to me, Sam. I could get used to this. Sam placed the tray on the desk, his tone turning serious. How are you holding up? Ethan sighed, taking a seat. I'm Munadin. There's a lot to process, but knowing they can't hurt me or the company anymore makes it easier. Sam hesitated, then said, You know, you're stronger than most people would be in your shoes. What they did, it could have broken anyone, but you're still standing. Ethan looked at the young man, his heart swelling with appreciation. Sometimes I wonder if I'd be standing without you and Grace. You've both reminded me that not everyone is out to take advantage. That loyalty still exists. Sam smiled shyly. I'm just glad I could help. Later that afternoon, Ethan received a call from the police. The officer's voice was calm, but firm as he provided an update on Derek and Lauren's case. Both suspects are cooperating now that the evidence has been presented. They've admitted to most of the charges and are working with their lawyers to negotiate a plea deal. Ethan exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over him. Thank you for letting me know. After ending the call, Ethan sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over him. Justice was being served, but it didn't erase the pain of betrayal. Derek and Lauren had been integral parts of his life, and their actions had left scars he wasn't sure would ever fully heal. That evening, Ethan invited Grace and Sam to join him for dinner in the mansion's dining room. The table, which once seemed vast and impersonal, now felt warmer with their presence. The meal was simple, but the conversation was lighthearted, a welcome reprieve from the heaviness of recent days. You know, Grace said, raising her glass, this might be the first time I've seen you genuinely relax in months. Ethan chuckled, lifting his own glass. Well, it's hard to stay tense with the two of you around. You've both done more for me than I can ever repay. Sam grinned. You've already done plenty. Besides, I think Grace and I make a pretty good team." Grace smirked. "Don't get used to being my sidekick, Sam." They all laughed, the sound filling the room with a warmth Ethan hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. After dinner, Ethan and Sam walked out onto the patio, the cool evening air carrying the faint scent of jasmine. The stars overhead glittered like scattered diamonds, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a sense of peace. "You know, Sam," Ethan said, leaning against the railing, "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what comes next." Sam glanced at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I've spent so much of my life building this empire, but I never really thought about what it all means. What I wanted to stand for," Ethan admitted. "After everything that's happened, I've realized that success doesn't mean much if it's built on shaky ground." Sam nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "So, what are you going to do?" Ethan looked at him, a determined glint in his eyes. "I'm going to rebuild not just the company, but everything. Stronger, better, and with people I can trust." Sam smiled. "Sounds like a solid plan." The next day, Ethan called a meeting with his senior staff, announcing sweeping changes to the company's structure and priorities. He emphasized transparency, integrity, and the importance of fostering a culture of trust. Grace watched from the side of the room, her heart swelling with pride. Ethan's leadership, tested by betrayal, had emerged stronger and more resolute. He was no longer just a businessman, he was a leader with purpose. As the weeks passed, Ethan's life began to stabilize. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, became a place of genuine connection. Grace remained his trusted confidant, while Sam continued to grow into a vital part of Ethan's life, offering insights and support that belied his young age. One evening, Ethan sat in his study, finalizing plans for a mentorship program aimed at helping disadvantaged youth. Inspired by Sam's resilience and determination, he wanted to provide opportunities for others who had been overlooked by society. As he signed the final document, Sam entered the room, a curious look on his face. "What's all this?" he asked. Ethan smiled, holding up the papers. "The start of something new, a way to give back." Sam's eyes widened as he realized the scope of the project. This is amazing, Ethan." "It's only the beginning," Ethan said, "and I want you to be a part of it. You've already shown me what loyalty and determination look like. Now, I want you to help me show others." Sam's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just say yes." Sam nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Yes." As Ethan watched Sam leave the study, a sense of hope blossomed in his chest. The betrayal that had once threatened to consume him had instead become the catalyst for something greater, a renewed purpose, stronger relationships, and a legacy worth building. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt truly at peace. The hum of activity at Caldwell Enterprises had shifted in tone. The once transactional, high-pressure atmosphere had softened into something more collaborative and purpose-driven. Ethan sat at the head of the conference room table, his senior team gathered before him. A blueprint for the new mentorship program lay spread out, vibrant and full of promise. "This initiative is about more than just business," Ethan said, his voice steady but impassioned. "It's about giving people opportunities they never thought possible. If we succeed in this, we'll build something that lasts far beyond any financial success." Grace nodded, her quiet confidence reinforcing Ethan's vision. "We've reached out to several organizations already. They're excited to partner with us." Sam, seated near the end of the table, leaned forward. "What about logistics? Where do we start?" Ethan smiled. "We start small. A pilot program here in the city. We focus on mentorship, education, and job placement. Once we prove it works, we expand." The room buzzed with energy as the team discussed next steps. Ethan looked around, seeing not just employees, but people who believed in what they were building together. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity. After the meeting, Ethan and Sam walked through the company's main office, a place Sam had begun visiting regularly since Ethan brought him deeper into his world. "I've never seen a company run like this," Sam said, his tone filled with awe. "Most places, the people at the top don't care about anyone else." Ethan chuckled softly. That's how I was here too once. All I cared about was the next deal, the next milestone. But I've learned that success means nothing if it doesn't lift others up. Sam nadit totpali. I'm glad you see it that way. I think I want to be like that someday. Someone who makes a difference. Ethan stopped walking and turned to Sam, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. You already are, Sam. And if you stick with me, I'll make sure you have every tool you need to keep making a difference. Back at the mansion that evening, Ethan reviewed the progress on the legal proceedings against Derek and Lauren. His lawyers had assured him that the case was airtight, but he couldn't shake the lingering weight of what had transpired. Grace arrived with updates, her professionalism tempered by genuine care. They've agreed to a plea deal, she said, handing him the report. Both of them will serve time, and they're required to pay restitution. Ethan scanned the document, his jaw tightening. It's the best outcome we could have hoped for, he said finally. But it still feels hollow. Grace sat across from him, her voice soft. Because they were close to you. Betrayal isn't something you just move past, even when justice is served. Ethan sighed. I thought I'd feel relief. Closure. But all I feel is a sense of loss. Grace reached out, placing her hand on his. You've handled this with more grace than most people could, Ethan. And look at what you're building now. You're turning something terrible into something meaningful. Her words struck a chord. Ethan gave her a small, grateful smile. Thank you, Grace, for everything. The next morning, Ethan called Sam into the study. The boy had quickly become a fixture in Ethan's life, his resilience and honesty a constant source of inspiration. I have something for you, Ethan said, handing Sam a crisp envelope. Sam opened it, his eyes widening as he read the contents. This is for school? Ethan nodded. You've got potential, Sam. And I don't just mean as a worker. You're smart, determined, and you care about doing the right thing. I want to invest in your future. Sam's voice faltered. Ethan, I don't know what to say. No one's ever done anything like this for me. You don't have to say anything, Ethan said warmly. Just promise me you'll use this opportunity to become everything I know you can be. Tears threatened to spill from Sam's eyes, but he blinked them away and stood straighter. I promise. I won't let you down. Later that week, Ethan held the first community meeting for the mentorship program. The event was modest, hosted in a local community center, but the turnout was larger than expected. Young people from across the city gathered, eager to hear about the opportunities being offered. Ethan stood at the podium, flanked by Grace and Sam. He spoke candidly, sharing his own journey from humble beginnings to success and the lessons he had learned along the way. This program isn't about giving handouts, he said, his voice steady but impassioned. It's about creating pathways. It's about helping people realize their potential and giving them the tools to succeed. The crowd erupted in applause, the energy in the room palpable. Ethan stepped back, allowing Sam to take the microphone. I'm living proof that people can change their lives with the right support, Sam said, his voice clear and confident. Ethan gave me a chance when I had nothing. Now I want to help others the way he helped me. Ethan watched with pride as Sam addressed the crowd, his journey from a struggling young man to a leader unfolding before his eyes. That night, as Ethan sat on the patio overlooking the estate, Sam joined him, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. You've got a way with people, Ethan said, smiling at the boy. Guess I've had a good mentor, Sam replied with a grin. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the quiet night enveloping them. Ethan thought back to the storm of betrayal and chaos that had upended his life, marveling at how far they had come since. You know, Ethan said finally, if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here, starting over in so many ways, I wouldn't have believed them. But now, I think it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. Sam nodded. Me too. As the stars twinkled above and the mansion stood strong behind them, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. The betrayal he had endured had tested him, but it had also shown him the strength of loyalty, the power of resilience, and the importance of using his success to uplift others. He had lost much, but in the process, he had gained something far more valuable, a renewed purpose and a family forged not by blood, but by trust and love. The months following the launch of the mentorship program brought an invigorating sense of purpose to Ethan's life. What had started as a small initiative quickly gained traction, drawing attention from community leaders, philanthropists, and business partners. Each day brought new challenges, but also new triumphs, as the program began to impact the lives of countless young people across the city. Ethan stood in his office at Caldwell Enterprises, overlooking the bustling downtown streets. A smile tugged at the corners of his lips as he thought about the upcoming mentorship gala, a celebration of the program's early success. It was the first time in years that an event in his name felt meaningful, a testament to the new direction his life had taken. Sam burst into the office, his excitement barely contained. "Ethan, you have to see this," he said, holding up a tablet. Ethan chuckled at the boy's energy. "What is it?" "It's the video from the program's first graduation ceremony," Sam said, setting the tablet on the desk. Ethan watched as the screen lit up with footage of young men and women, dressed in caps and gowns, walking across the stage to receive certificates. Their smiles were radiant, their pride infectious. Ethan recognized some of their faces, students who had come from broken homes or lived in shelters, now standing tall with newfound confidence. "They're incredible," Ethan said quietly, his chest swelling with pride. "It's because of you," Sam said. "You gave them this chance." Ethan shook his head. "No, Sam. We gave them this chance. You, Grace, and everyone else who believed in what we're building. I just got the ball rolling." As the day of the gala approached, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. The betrayal he had suffered no longer felt like a wound, it was now a scar. A reminder of the lessons he had learned and the strength he had found. One evening, Ethan visited Grace in her office to review the final plans for the event. She looked up from her laptop, a rare smile gracing her face. "You know," Grace said, closing her laptop, "this gala is going to be more than just a celebration. It's a symbol of everything you've overcome." Ethan nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "It does feel like a turning point, but it's not just about me. It's about everyone we've helped, and everyone will help in the future." Grace tilted her head, studying him. "You've changed, Ethan. The man who built this company was focused on success above all else. But the man standing here now, he's building something far more important." Her words struck a chord, and Ethan gave her a small smile. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grace. You've been my compass through all of this." The night of the gala arrived, and the mansion was alive with light and music. The grand ballroom, once a place of hollow social gatherings, now felt vibrant and purposeful. Guests included program graduates, their families, and community leaders who had supported the initiative. Ethan stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. Sam hovered nearby, looking sharp in a tailored suit Ethan had gifted him for the occasion. "Never thought I'd be at a fancy event like this," Sam said, grinning. Ethan laughed. "You belong here, Sam. You've earned it." As the night unfolded, Ethan took the stage to deliver a speech. The room fell silent as he stood before the microphone, his presence commanding yet approachable. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Ethan began, his voice steady. "This program started as a small idea, a way to give back to the community that has given me so much. But it has grown into something far greater than I could have imagined." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "I've learned that success isn't measured by what you achieve alone. It's measured by what you share with others, by the lives you touch, the opportunities you create, and the legacy you leave behind." Applause erupted as Ethan stepped back, his heart swelling with gratitude. He caught Sam's eye in the crowd, the boy's pride evident in his wide grin. Later that evening, as the guests mingled and laughed, Ethan found a quiet moment to reflect. He stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the warmth inside. Sam joined him a few minutes later, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "For you," Sam said, handing one to Ethan. Ethan accepted the glass, raising it slightly. "To new beginnings." Sam clinked his glass against Ethan's. "To making a difference." They stood in comfortable silence, gazing out at the city lights. "You know," Ethan said after a moment, "when everything fell apart, I thought I'd never recover. But now, looking at what we've built together, I realize it was all worth it. Sam nodded. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. Ethan smiled, the truth of Sam's words settling in his heart. You're wise beyond your years, Sam. Learn from the best, Sam replied with a grin. As the gala came to an end and the last guest departed, Ethan stood in the now quiet ballroom, taking in the scene. The once empty space was filled with memories of laughter, hope, and connection. Grace approached, her shoes in hand and a tired but content smile on her face. We did it, she said. Ethan nodded. We did. The days that followed were filled with plans for the program's expansion, but Ethan also took time to focus on himself. He found joy in the little things, quiet mornings on the patio, conversations with Sam about the future, and walks through the city that had once felt like a battlefield, but now felt like home. The journey hadn't been easy. Betrayal, loss, and pain had tested Ethan in ways he never anticipated. But through resilience, kindness, and the support of unlikely allies, he had found a path forward, one filled with hope, purpose, and the unshakable belief that the best was yet to come. As Ethan looked out over the estate one quiet evening, with Sam and Grace by his side, he felt a deep sense of peace. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined him. Together, they had turned pain into progress, betrayal into trust, and despair into hope. It wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new story entirely, one worth telling. If this story moved you or inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales of resilience, trust, and the power of redemption. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you for being part of this journey. Here's to stories that remind us of the strength within us all.